So a lot of noise has been going on regarding Trump's tariff on the world. I was, happy to be on the sidelines, just observe how this thing will play out and so forth. But it is apparent to me that there are a lot of good, hardworking, honest folk that simply do not even understand what tariffs are, and yet they are feeling so passionate about Trump's words of war, utilizing the weapon that is so-called the tariffs. So I just wanted to provide a bit of educational content for you all. Some of you may ask, well, Eli, what qualification do you have to comment or discuss this particular topic? Well, very simply, I've been doing international logistics for better part of 30 years. And a lot of that has to do with international tariffs and the conditions of import or export, whichever side of the fence you sit on. So yes, I might not be a total expert, but I know a thing or two about it. So first part, what are tariffs? It is a levy imposed on goods that crosses borders from one nation to another. Tariffs traditionally has been in place as a vehicle to protect the local industry against overseas competition that may be far cheaper, so therefore has a risk of those cheaper goods coming to your country and killing your industry. Say for example, you make one pen locally for say $1, China is making it for 70 cents. Clearly the market is going to go and buy the 70-cent pen and not the $1 pen. So the government is like, okay, well, let's put a levy on this Chinese pen. So they say they will put, for example, maybe a 30% tariff on the pen, which then will make the price of that pen comparable to the local cost of that pen. There are subtle nuances in various industries, but mostly it's to do with protectionism, okay? To protect your local industry from overseas cheaper competition. Who pays that levy or tax? Let's call it that. It is not the factory in China who makes the pen for 70 cents. It's the trader of the pen that pays for it. The importer who wants this pen in the US market, right? Not the factory, has to pay the extra tariff to the US government. It has nothing to do with the manufacturer. On the chance that the manufacturer is the importer in the US, right? Then yes, the manufacturer, the importer will have to pay that money. But more often than not, it's always the local economies or the companies that exist within that market that pays for these extra taxes. The importer has to find enough value. Either say, well, you know what, this is no longer economically viable, or yes, I still want this product because this product is very much in demand, but the importer is not going to absorb that extra 30% tariff, is he now? He's going to go, well, it's gone up, but people still want it. At 30%, I'm predicting they're still going to buy it. So I'm going to increase my final price and pass it on to you, the final buyer of that product. If he says no or yes, either way, you as the final buyer of the pen will need to spend more for the pen. How? Well, very simply, if he no longer imports that pen for a lower price to be made available for you to buy, you now have to go buy the local option, which is much more expensive than the previous product that was from China, right? If he says, yes, I still want it, and you really want that product, well, then you have to pay the extra 30% because he will pass that out. So those are tariffs. Now, what does Trump want? Well, over the weekend, he declared 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China. That's what he wants. But let's face it, he doesn't want anything from Mexico or Canada. The main target of all this is China, right? China is the competing beast that he is trying to, I guess, use to his advantage to get his popularity, because he got a lot of votes by putting China as the bad guy. So he is a good guy. We can show you actually a clip from his Vice President, J.D. Vance, talking about how China is essentially stealing all of the manufacturing jobs from USA.
We know the Chinese, of course, have stolen American manufacturing jobs for 30, 40 years. We are sick of being taken advantage of. We still have, thank God, the biggest economy in the entire world, the best people and the best workers. But the message from President Trump to the entire world is very clear. We are done being taken advantage of.
My dear viewer, I'm not going to treat you like a naive and ignorant person like your government is. Let me ask you something. How do you steal someone's job? That job has to be provided by someone. And who's asking China to make all these cheaper products? Is it the Chinese government? No. It is the US companies who are trying to maximize their profits by using cheap labor whilst making good top dollar in your marketplace, right? Look, it's economics 101, it's capitalism, power to capitalism, right? So straight away after he announced that, pretty much within 24, 48 hours later, he's paused Mexican's tariff and also the Canadians' tariff for 30 days. And the official message or narrative is that both countries are going to commit to a certain level of border protection, so there is no free flow of drugs and contraband and illegal migrants or whatever across the border. So I don't think that's the true outcome of those discussions. There's a lot more to it. I'm quite confident of that, but let's just run with it for now. So let's go through why. Well, all through Trump's campaign, he's been campaigning on making China the evil villain stealing jobs, as we have discussed. That's why our manufacturing is died, and he's trying to really try to muster up the 80%, the workforce, to feel passionate about why they are so hard done by. And unfortunately, the narrative for me is rather simplistic. A nation can't just go to another nation and go, you know what, we're gonna now make all your products and you have no say in it. That doesn't happen, guys. Nobody held a gun to these companies to go to China and get those goods made. Let's be very clear about that. But why does he want it? Well, obviously, I think, it's his first 100 days in the office. He is pandering to his base. He's sort of created this monster feeding on this particular narrative, and now he has to continue to feed the monster, so to speak. What does that actually mean? Because, you can say all these great words and you can say all these narratives and you can, muster up all your troops and be passionate about it. But that doesn't mean it just ends there, because these things he is talking about has real world implications on everybody. Whether you are for him or against him, it has an implication not just on Americans, for everybody, including us here in Australia. So on that, let's touch on the narrative versus reality outcomes, okay? Well, the narrative is very simple. They're stealing our jobs. We're going to increase extra tariff so that China has to pay these extra percentages of dollars to get their products into our market. Apple, last time I checked, isn't a Chinese company. It's an American company. Apple is taking advantage of the Chinese labor and then selling that product at a premium in the US market. It doesn't make sense. The person who will be paying for these extra percentage increases of tariff will be the likes of Apple. And believe me, when's the last time you know that Apple pays something more and let you have a free ride? Hasn't happened to me. So believe me, your iPhone is going to cost a lot more now. Any Apple product is going to cost more. Any Tesla product is going to cost more. Anything that you use, majority of the stuff that's made in China are going to cost more, not because the Chinese factories who's making these products are charging you. It is the people who ask those factories to make the goods to charge you. So those are going to be the reality. You are going to pay more. And what does that mean when you pay more? Your inflation goes up. And what have we been trying to fight in the last 12 months? Inflation. Our interest rates have gone up to fight inflation. But by him saying the narrative of we're going to levy extra taxes or tariffs on, on China, Mexico and Canada, and this is going to be good for our country, that simply doesn't make logical or economic sense. Is he using it as a bargaining chip of sorts? I believe so, but I think it's probably a little bit more simpler than that. Trump loves to be liked, right? He loves to be adored and liked and so forth, and he loves to make these grandiose statements and what have you. He's putting out this outlandish stuff, almost like a narcissistic partner that keeps the other half on the edge, on the toes. Some of you watching who've ever been with one, believe me, you know what I mean, right? So clearly the narrative versus reality doesn't match up. America isn't going to win by them levying more of these taxes on Canada, Mexico, and China. What has Canada ever done to the US other than be the most loyal puppy dog that America has? Mexico, take away the legal side of things, 70% of the Mexicans' avocado plants are consumed in the US. Mexico supplies most restaurants with kitchen hands, chefs, cooks. Mexicans are very much a reality in the US. No amount of tariff is ever going to change that. What is the actual reality of these tariffs? Well, he's already put it on pause for 30 days. And to be frank, probably with the pattern that is Trump, some things will just fizzle out. And I'm hoping that is, because it's not going to be good for the US, because when you limit your import options and without any manufacturing base, because you've already given it up for the better part of 2-3 decades in some sectors, you can't just overnight turn those industry back on again. It's just not possible. The supply chain between China or the rest of the world with the US is so intertwined. So what that simply means is that when you increase the tariff on, say, China by so much, a lot of industries are going to hurt. A lot of their products will cost more. They might not get access to a lot of things that made certain products viable. You might see a lot of products fall off the shelves altogether because there is no longer an incentive for the importer or the trader of that goods to supply those goods to you at a price point that you were paying before. The reality of it is that you'll either miss out or pay more. And if there is more tariffs going on, it will crash the US dollar. If US do not allow me to trade in their market profitably, I'll just go trade with someone else. Especially with BRICS and all that sort of stuff going on, the requirement, the de-dollarization process will be sped up, not slowed down, because they'll just trade each other with their own currencies, right? With the BRICS nation and so forth. So there's not a single angle these imposed tariffs will spell good for the US. At the end of the day, these are the hands we've been dealt, and we're just gonna have to play as best as we can. So my final concluding thoughts on this. The 25% tariffs with Canada and Mexico, I don't think they will stick, because if they do, it would be US shooting itself in the foot. There will be no good economic outcome from it. Why Trump is picking on Canada is beyond me. I think Canada is being a very obedient neighbor, right, on many regards. Mexico has been a source of labor, source of produce, albeit yes, there are some black spots with that border and so forth, but that's realities that comes with that part of the world. Let's just follow the simplistic narrative. Let's put tariff on it so that we don't let China take advantage of us. The first time when Trump was in office, he imposed all these extra levies on the Chinese factories. And the Chinese factories were like, oh God, you know what? We're not paying the extra levies, but these importers are no longer buying from us. So how are we going to increase our manufacturing? Because if we don't produce as much, that means our economy will slow down, which was the case. So a lot of these factories panicked. What they did was that they would just wind down their factories in China, and they would just prop them up in all the other countries that didn't have tariffs imposed to. For example, a lot of the Southeast Asian countries had a massive sprout in manufacturing activities. Vietnam, I'm looking at you. Malaysia, I'm looking at you. Not because all of a sudden these countries just started, turned the clogs on manufacturing, the engines started working and firing. No, those were spurred up by Chinese factories simply shutting down the operation, or sometimes not even shutting down, but just going to Vietnam, starting up a factory within the space of a couple of months, and the factory started churning out goods. Now that happened in Mexico as well, right? A lot of the factories, Chinese factories just actually went to Mexico and created their manufacturing base. So that's why, if you look at the data of Mexico's productivity in 24 compared to the previous year, we went through the roof. When you're trying to catch water with your hand, the harder you grab, the quicker it flows out of your hand. And this is what we saw when Trump's first term in the office, was when he imposed these tariffs on China. A lot of these factories just went elsewhere and got their products in without paying the extra tariff. It's not the Chinese factory that got it in, it's still the importer. They still have to work with the importer or the American company to get those products in, because ultimately the owner of those goods upon importation before being sold to you are those American companies who are making the profits on it, right? So it takes two to tango. So the immediate pain will be felt by the importer of those goods, and then after that, it will be felt by you, which meant inflation is going to go up because you're paying more for something, which means that if inflation goes up and the economy is too hot, what do you think the reserve banks are going to do? They are no longer going to reduce interest rate. They're going to want to keep interest rate where they are for longer, or even, dare I say it, increase them back up again. My opinion is the manufacturing problem isn't something that can be solved in a year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. If America really wants to get its act together, it has to start from within, start with these multi-million and billionaires, right? And saying, yes, are we willing to put some of this money back into our country, educate our workforce, paying extra high salaries so that we can get our manufacturing base back again, so that we don't need to rely on China? Now, here's a question. How many of those billionaires you think are gonna say, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go spend more money, pay more salaries, so I can have it made in USA again? It sounds great in a utopian vacuum world, but it doesn't happen in the real commercial world, guys. The reason why the manufacturing industry in the US have gone away from the US is because there are cheaper labors elsewhere in the world, and American companies, you know, the elite, the ones who's made the money, want to continue to enjoy those profits. They will not just let those profits go without a fight, let's call it that. So, which is interesting, right? Because with Trump's inauguration, he had all the billionaires behind him and so forth, and you're like, well, what's going on there? I think it's probably Trump's way of saying, you know what, I keep my friends close, I keep my enemies closer. People get very emotional and they started, you know, calling Trump this, calling Trump that. It's important to sometimes not ask why it is happening, but accept what is happening and then look at the outcomes. Because once you know and witness the outcome, because those will become fact, then you can reverse engineer, you can work out, oh, that's exactly why. All in all, I think the US tariff is a massively bad idea for the Americans, first and foremost. If you have a market and you have suppliers that must supply to you, and you are the end all or be all for those suppliers, then yes, tariffs will have a very powerful impact. But as we touched on earlier on, China and the rest of the world no longer solely depends on the US. And in the case of China, they've invested in Africa, they've invested in South America, they've invested across their own neighbors and so forth. They're conquering the world through trade. What that simply means, they're having a more diversified portfolio of customers where they can utilize their manufacturing base to supply to. And this is why I think this whole Trump tariff thing is mostly for domestic consumption and mostly for his base, right? Internationally, commercially, economically, it makes no sense to anyone, especially them, especially the Americans, whether we like it or not. The reality is, guys, China is the world's factory. It has been the world's factory for more than 30 years. This is not something that can just easily be replaced. Supply chains are all intertwined. We all rely on each other to make this global trade possible. Even look at the shipping routes. It's mostly centered with China as the centerpiece. All of these things, especially logistics. I know, trust me, anything in logistics, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes years upon years to cultivate, to generate, to perfect. You have this almost like Jenga-esque type of situation where one relies on the other, and you can't just simply pick and choose which piece you want to throw out, because if you pull that piece out, the whole thing collapses. Most of the world now have been so solely dependent on China's manufacturing. If we make it too difficult for our own industry to buy from China and supply to the market, these people just utilize the money to go make money somewhere else, right? And what that means is the general public is going to suffer. Americans more than ever. Why? Because similar to Australia, our physical goods manufacturing has dwindled to almost non-existent, but our farming communities, you know, our energy and agriculture is what we really have left to supply the world with, right? So Trump imposed 10% on China. China's bounced back with basically 25% tariff on US goods. So what that means is that you have this very unique situation where Americans don't have another option to source their goods from because they've relied on China for so long, they've got nowhere else. And you can't just recreate these supply chains overnight. It's not possible. So they're going to be doing it hard for a very long time to come. Meanwhile, whatever industry that relied on this international trade, right, which is export of US grain and wheat and fruits and meats and what have you, are going to be punished as well. So from that perspective, your exports are going to suffer. Your imports are going to suffer because the prices will go up. None of this picture is going to mean anything positive for the American economy. When Australians were having all these narratives against China, we called our biggest trading partner our public enemy number one overnight because we were pandering to the Americans. And China's like, huh? How do you go about wanting our business and yet embarrass us on a world stage and calling us all the names you want to? It doesn't work that way. You will not want to do business with someone who insults you. It doesn't happen in the real world. It doesn't happen in my world. It doesn't happen in your world. Why should it happen on a national scale? A trader of commodities, right, like the grains and fruits, right, these are what farmers rely on to make money. So if China increases the tariff on American, say, American grapes, for argument's sake, right, China will be like, well, okay, I don't need to buy grapes from you. I'll go to Australia and buy grapes there. Or I go to wherever they might grow grapes. I don't need to have you because I have multitude of options to buy my grapes from. In America, well, I love my iPhone. I love my iPhone ecosystem. Every iteration I bought one. And my 17th is going to come. Before it was $2,000. And with these tariffs, now it's going to cost me $2,500. Well, what's your alternative? Go buy a different phone. Do you see the difference here? China is exporting finished goods. America is exporting commodities. If America continues on with these tariffs and what have you, China will just go elsewhere, and America export industries, especially in the agriculture and the commodities, will suffer. Those are the realities of 2025, guys. These tariffs are a massively bad idea, and unfortunately being sold to the local people by its president as somehow a good idea. And it's high time that the local population understand these simple truths. Thank you.